Do your patriotic duty and ensure that Russia defeats Ukraine. That's the propaganda-laced message that the Kremlin has been delivering to anybody who will listen. This concept of duty is all that stands between the Russian military and complete collapse, and it's one that Russia needs to hold firm for it to stand any chance of defeating Ukraine. But that idea hasn't exactly held up. Duty has gone right out of the window. Russia's military is falling apart amidst frontline madness, equipment shortages, and incidents that suggest Russia's supposedly patriotic soldiers are turning against one another. And perhaps the only evidence needed to prove that, though plenty more will follow, is that Russian soldiers are shooting their own comrades. These aren't isolated incidents. Russians shooting Russians happens far too often for Vladimir Putin's comfort. And it's a problem that spans everything from Russian commanders giving the orders to crazed Russian soldiers losing their minds and killing everyone in sight in a desperate hunt for an escape from the brutality of the Ukraine war. One of these incidents has happened very recently. Euromaidan press reports that a Russian conscript has opened fire on his comrades while serving at a military base in the Moscow region. The soldier hit his target as he managed to kill 2 people and wound another. For this particular soldier, escape from the base wasn't an option. He would have been caught and faced harsh Russian justice. So, rather than trying to run, he escaped by turning his gun on himself. 1 bullet later, a 3rd Russian was dead. This is just the latest in many such incidents that have plagued Russia's military. Almost a year before the conscript took out 2 comrades before killing himself, Newsweek reported on a similar story that occurred in Ukraine's Zaporizhia region. This time, a former Russian prisoner stationed on the front lines executed a far more elaborate plan. His name is Maxim Fedorchenko, and he went out of his way to cause as much damage to his own people as possible. Newsweek says that the former prisoner tossed a grenade into the dugout where his comrade slept. Following the explosion, he emerged with a gun in hand to shoot anybody who survived the blast. Then, he ran. And nobody knows what became of him. Why is a former prisoner serving on the front lines in Ukraine, one might wonder. This video covers frontline madness, and it's a Putin-approved policy that led to Fedorchenko being in Ukraine in the first place. Desperate to bolster his forces, Putin created a new law through which Russian convicts would be given the option of serving their sentences or fighting for Russia in Ukraine. In January, the Kyiv Independent reported that as many as 180,000 Russian convicts are now fighting in Ukraine, many of whom would have been convicted of violent crimes. To Russia, it seems to make sense to have unpredictable criminals serving in its military. Fedorchenko's story shows why it isn't. And if it's not conscripts losing their minds or criminals turning guns on their comrades that Russia's soldiers have to worry about, it's orders from their own commanders. There have been several reports of Russian soldiers being killed by order of the very people who are leading them into battle, often as a result of supposed cowardice. In April, the Kyiv Independent reported on one such incident, noting that Ukraine's military intelligence had recently intercepted a call suggesting that one Russian commander had let his temper get the best of him. "F the 55th, the commander says of another unit. "Shoot them. That's the battalion commander's order. Shoot them," the commander screamed during the call. Draw conclusions about what must have happened next. In July, the Anti-Imperial Bloc of Nations, or ABN, published a piece highlighting how this angry call was far from a one-off incident. It noted that Russian soldiers are killing their wounded comrades either with headshots or strikes with the butts of their guns. Ukraine has apparently seen this firsthand via footage that its drones have captured, and these executions of the wounded appear to be happening systematically, ABN says. The word systematically suggests one thing. This is an order that must have come from Russian command. In one of the videos, a wounded Russian can be seen lying in a trench, moving his arms and head. Another soldier approaches him, examines him, and then hits him 3 times on the head with a rifle butt, then steps over the body and moves on. ABN reports. It appears that wounded Russian soldiers risk being executed or left behind rather than receiving medical evacuation. "Do your duty in Ukraine," Russia cries. Dying in Ukraine at the hands of fellow comrades seemed to be the reality, at least for many of Russia's soldiers. Euromaidan Press says that incidents such as these are far from rare in the Russian military, especially among the newly drafted recruits. Soldier morale is in the toilet, with reports from troops and their relatives suggesting that many are being driven to the darkest depths of desperation by bullying, deprivation, and an unending sense of hopelessness in their situation. Many who are serving on the front or training so they can be sent in the future know that they're very likely to die. Russia's younger conscripts aren't blind to everything that's happening in Ukraine. They see footage from the front, learn from returning soldiers, and know what awaits them in Ukraine, Euromaidan Press says. Many try to flee, but harsh new laws criminalize even online searches for information deemed extremist, a label that conveniently includes criticism of the war. Perhaps what Russia is experiencing now is a morale crisis that it has failed to address, coming to a head. After all, it's not like there haven't been warning signs. As far back as July 2023, captured Russian soldiers were talking about the abject horrors to which they're subjected when serving their country, and the effects these horrors have on their psyches. In that month, CNN was provided rare permission to interview several Russian captives by Ukraine. The outlet spoke to a man named Anton, who described his experience during the brutal Battle of Bakhmut. Russia lost up to 30,000 soldiers in that battle alone, the BBC reports, and Anton was very fortunate not to be one of them. He described jumping like rabbits under mortar rounds and bombs for 3 days as he and a fellow soldier, named Slava, simply tried to survive the fighting. At one point, they managed to fall asleep, only for Ukrainian shelling to blow a crater into the entrance of their foxhole. The two ran, picking their way through craters and mangled bodies. Eventually, Anton and Slava found their way into another foxhole. Safety didn't last long. Ukraine soldiers had been tracking them. 2 grenades were thrown into the foxhole, and Anton only survived because of how deep the hole ran. It was silent for a while, then the Ukrainians came back. I thought that was the end, Anton tells CNN. I switched the rifle to single-shot mode and I thought I would shoot myself, but I couldn't. Anton was yet another of Russia's convict soldiers. His experience on the front line offers the perfect example of why Russian morale is so low that many in the country's military are turning their guns on their comrades. And if not their comrades, they take aim at themselves. Anton couldn't pull the trigger, but the fact that he was so desperate that he would have if he could says everything that's needed to know about the state of a Russian soldier's psyche during the most brutal battles to which Putin subjects them. Other Russian soldiers are far more willing to harm themselves if it means escaping from the horrors of war. In September, the Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA, wrote that there's an increasing trend among Russia's soldiers to commit acts of self-harm to escape their duties. These soldiers aren't freshly minted conscripts forced into battle for the first time either. CEPA says that the budding self-harm epidemic is being conducted by some of Russia's most elite soldiers as they try to escape the war and claim the compensation that they believe they're owed. One such scam involved 35 of Russia's high-ranking officials, officers, and private soldiers, CEPA says. Collectively, those soldiers stood to receive $2.4 million in state payments if they were sent back home after being wounded in the line of duty. One of the fraudsters, Guard Colonel Artem Gorodilov, reportedly had his soldiers shoot him 4 times under express orders to avoid vital organs so he could get back home with his money. 2 things become clear from this story. Even Russia's elite soldiers are desperate to get back home, and they're also far more concerned with money than they are with any sense of patriotic duty that Putin tries to instill into them. Is it any wonder that these soldiers are going crazy on the front lines? The stories about Russian commanders ordering the execution of their own and the systematic killing of the wounded mentioned earlier are all signs of a military that's entrenched in a culture of brutality. And for more proof of that, consider this other insane story from the front lines. On October 17, The Telegraph reported that Russian soldiers, who defy orders to go on suicidal advances into Ukrainian territory, are being handcuffed to trees and left to die. The outlet reports on a video demonstrating how 4 Russian soldiers were left to this fate. Abandoned without food or water by their supposed comrades, they could only hope that Ukraine soldiers would find them before starvation and dehydration did. Those soldiers weren't in Ukraine to fight. Not really. They were expendable cannon fodder sent to soak up Ukrainian bullets, and they knew it. Their commanders cared so little for their existences that they would rather allow those soldiers to die tortured deaths than provide them with any opportunity to avoid the fighting. Russia's military displays constant brutality in Ukraine, committing war crimes by the dozen. It should come as no surprise that this same brutality is directed toward any Russian soldier who dares to take even the smallest of steps out of line. By this point, the cracks in the Russian war machine are quite evident, and the stories of the country's military dysfunction are far from over. Thousands of Russia's soldiers have died in Ukraine. However, many of those who survived don't show any sort of respect to the dead. Instead, as Euromaidan press reports, they will often loot the bodies of their dead comrades as soon as the opportunity presents itself. The outlet says that the soldiers Russia deploys are often sent into combat with limited supplies. Equipment shortages have reached absurd levels, Euromaidan press claims. Many of Russia's soldiers are often sent into battle without the most basic of gear, such as boots and protective vests. So when a soldier dies who happens to have that gear, comrades often descend like vultures. In one example that Euromaidan press shares, a video of a Russian soldier yanking the helmet and vest off one of his dead comrades has been making the rounds. The soldier is almost gleeful as he loots, to the point where he sarcastically thanks his fallen comrade for the gear. Could this be the sign of a cracked mind? A soldier who's so numb to the horrors of the war and the brutality of his commanders that he's lost all sight of any value that his comrade's life may have held? Or is this a case of a soldier hiding his desperation behind a callous surface because he knows that his country has sent him into a fight ill-prepared and unlikely to survive? Either way, it doesn't change the fact that Russian soldiers are looting the bodies of their dead to scavenge whatever they can get that their own military fails to provide. In some cases, the looting is premeditated and combined with the killing of comrades discussed earlier in the video. In April, the Kyiv Post reported on an incident in which the Ukrainian organization I Want to Live intercepted a call from the Frontlines. I Want to Live provides Russian soldiers with the means to surrender themselves into Ukrainian captivity, though it also chronicles some of the terrible events in the Ukraine war. During the intercepted call, a Russian soldier says he's 500 when referring to another soldier. This is a military slang term that means the soldier disobeyed orders, and there can be only one consequence for that in the Russian military. We already took his stuff, though he was a 200, another soldier said, implying that he thought the soldier who disobeyed orders had been killed. He must have been killed, must have been shot, says another soldier, in a statement so frank that it reveals that Russia's standard practice is to kill anybody who disobeys orders. Another soldier adds that the 500 soldier is waiting to be extracted, leading to the soldier who started the conversation to comment, "He needs to be shot, he needs to be watched and shot." Again, the heartless pilfering of the dead in this incident is on plain display. Granted, there ended up being confusion about the fate of the soldier in question, but his comrades had already stolen everything that they could from him before they even learned of his fate. And once there was a hint that he might have survived, his supposed comrade said he should be shot. This is military dysfunction at an insane level, but again, it shouldn't come as a surprise. Even disregarding the desperation of soldiers who are scavenging gear just to stay alive, Russia itself is setting the example that what is owned by one can be taken by another. On July 30, the BBC published an article in which it revealed that the Russian state is stealing the money that it promised to give to its soldiers. The outlet tells the story of a soldier named Nikita Kursa who decided to fight in the war against Ukraine because he knew that it paid well. That alone is a sign that all of the Kremlin propaganda about patriotism is bunk. Most of Russia's soldiers are there for the paycheck. How could they not be? In some regions, the $62,500 a soldier is offered for their first year of service, plus a similar amount in compensation if they're injured, is 600% more than the average national wage, the BBC says. When Kursa returned from fighting, he got drunk after an argument with his wife and decided to take his money in a plastic bag to buy an apartment for himself. He tried to drive, only to be pulled over by police officers. That seems reasonable. Kursa was driving under the influence. But instead of arresting him, the officers started arguing about whether they should force Kursa to bribe them with his plastic bag of money. "Let's not do this, he's just come back from the war," one officer said. "Shut up," the other one replied. "Do you know how much money that is?" The counter-argument was clearly compelling, as Kursa ended up giving the police almost $32,000 in cold hard cash, meaning about half of his Ukraine war pay vanished. The Russian system that had promised he would live life as one of the country's elite when he came back instead stole from him, just like Russia's soldiers steal from the bodies of their dead comrades. Kursa ended up back where he started, fighting in Putin's army to earn some money. Back to Russia's massive equipment shortages for a moment. Those shortages are now so widespread, Euromaidan press reports, that Russia's soldiers are now fighting with weapons and ammunition that date back to World War II. The shortages go far beyond personal gear, as a video released by Ukraine's 225th Assault Regiment shows German detonators from World War II era found in a captured Russian ammunition depot, the outlet proclaims. The Sun YouTube channel shares a video that appears to prove this claim. In it, footage reveals Nazi-era German weapons and ammunition that Ukraine has recovered from the battlefield. The outlet claims that Russia's desperate soldiers are now breaking into museums to get their hands on old Nazi weapons to use against Ukraine. Hold on a second. Nazi weapons? This is from the military led by Putin, who's claimed many times in the past that one of the reasons for invading Ukraine was the supposed rise of fascism within the country. The followers of Nazi executioners, whatever they call themselves today, are doomed, Putin proclaimed in January 2024, adding that the regime in Kyiv glorifies Hitler's accomplices, the SS, yet it's Putin's soldiers who are reportedly seeking out Nazi-era weaponry. Now back to the types of Russian soldiers who kicked off this video covering Russia's frontline madness, the conscripts. Russia's conscripts have been drafted into its military. However, they're not supposed to face any fighting, at least during their 12 months of mandatory service. Conscripts aren't paid, and they shouldn't be deployed to combat zones or outside Russia unless they sign a contract. But, as with every other aspect of the Ukraine war, Russia finds ways to break its own rules. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, or RFE-RL, reported on one of those ways in May. It said that Russia has started offering its conscripts contracts to serve in Ukraine just 4 months into their conscription. Some sign up willingly, others, the outlet says, are coerced into signing, which only feeds the hopelessness that is so badly affecting Russian morale. A conscript who may once have endured their military service because they wouldn't have to fight and would go home afterward, instead faces the prospect of being pushed into a fight that they don't want to take part in. One of those conscripts, named Alexander, explained the quality of the training he received. As far as training goes, we did target practice a couple of times and that was it. There was no special training, Alexander told RFE-RL. He had been sent to Bryansk to dig trenches as part of his conscription. When Ukrainian soldiers counter-invaded nearby Kursk, Alexander the conscript ended up on the front. Senior officers ordered him, along with other conscripts, to forward positions. Behind them was a second line of defense containing actual professional soldiers who had far better equipment. Russia was going to use these conscripts as cannon fodder. Alexander concludes his tale with a story that's become all too familiar. Once we were under fire for several hours. We were sent on a scouting mission and then the Ukrainian armed forces came out. We couldn't run back. Our own people would shoot us for giving away our location. We lay down and waited for several hours. The most important part of this quote is clear. Our own people would shoot us. By now, it's evident that Alexander is likely telling the truth. There is far too much evidence of Russia doing that very thing shared in this video alone. And this ultimately is what the Russian military really is. Once feared as one of the world's most powerful military forces, Russia's military has come apart at the seams. Now, its soldiers who don't know if the bullet that kills them will come from a Ukrainian soldier or one of their own comrades. This video has shared some of the many stories of Russian military dysfunction. That dysfunction inevitably leads to failures, and Russia has experienced plenty of them ever since it invaded Ukraine. Check out our video, Every Russian Failure Explained in 19 Minutes, to find out what they are. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos highlighting the insanity that pervades the Russian army.